All right. So just to get things started, hello there. To all the audience members online and in person, welcome to Being Mindful with the Force. We're going to introduce ourselves and show, first off, that we have the presentation. For those in the audience, can you give us a thumbs up or a forced thumb if you can see the presentation perfect? So first off, let's meet our Jedi, Sith, and Mandos. So starting with Elizabeth, introduce yourself. Let us know what you do with your amazing abilities and your favorite Star Wars character, despite what we'll be talking about today.
Thank you for, first off, inviting us to this wonderful event. And I'm really excited to dive in with everyone. So brief introduction, I am Dr. Elizabeth Han, and my Korean name is Pangshil, Han Pangshil, and I'm considered 1.5 generation, or that I moved to the States in childhood. I'm half Korean, my mom is Korean, and my father is a disabled veteran of the US Army, and I am a licensed clinical psychologist. I work with teenagers, children, adolescents, adults, families, and I am super excited to talk about Star Wars today. Also doing not just therapy, but also I do assessments as well as part of what I do. We'll talk more about that later. And as far as favorite characters, I did choose someone specifically to talk about today, and I'm looking forward to talking about them as we go on as to why I chose this character to talk about specifically.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you again for having us.
You're welcome again. All right, and next, let's hear from Ben.
Hello, everyone. My name is Benjamin Taitz. I am a registered psychological associate here in California. I am a psychology doctoral candidate, all but dissertation. Hopefully we'll be graduating this year if my committee will behave themselves and just approve me. I currently work in clinical forensic psychotherapy. So I work with people on parole. So people who have fallen to the dark side, and I'm trying to bring them back to the light. My favorite character in all Star Wars media. Oh, geez. I think my favorite character right now is probably Mando, because he brings something very different to the Star Wars universe than we have seen before. So he's my current favorite. And this is the way.
This is the way. And next, Shelly, let us know a bit about you.
Hi, everyone. I am the department chair and professor in the Department of Victim Studies at Sam Houston State University. We're the only department of victim studies in the world. I always have to say that because it's a big deal. And my favorite Star Wars character, I'm going to admit it, although I don't like to necessarily, is Jabba the Hutt. And I collect Jabba the Hutt items, and I have every Jabba the Hutt action figure ever to be created. So it's Jabba.
All right, definitely was not expecting that choice, but Jabba needs some love too. And Brent, what about you?
Hi, I'm Brent Lyles. I'm a licensed mental health counselor in the state of Florida. I work full-time at a treatment center as a program director as well as clinical trainer. I specialize in trauma work with a concentration in addiction studies and mental health. Say my favorite character, I was torn between my head going back and forth. I'm going to go with the classic, which was my first favorite when I got introduced to Star Wars back in the 90s, Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, and you've got the beard for it too. Well done. Nicole, how about yourself?
Hi guys, I'm Nicole Hassler. I am a licensed clinical psychologist out of Buffalo, New York. I currently work in private practice and working mainly with children and adolescents, some adults that are struggling with depression, anxiety, and trauma-related disorders. And I would have to say, out of all of the Star Wars characters, I gotta go with Anakin. I gotta go with Anakin Skywalker.
You got to, because who else is going to? Doesn't end well. What about you, Colt?
I'm Colt Blunt. I'm a forensic psychologist working in the Midwest. I'm director of forensic evaluation for my state's evaluation program. And I'm going to go ahead and say that Han Solo has always been my favorite character, and I don't think that'll change.
Well, since you shot first, I won't be able to claim Han. But hello, everybody. My name is Dr. Isaac Taitz. I'm the head psychologist and president of All Mind Health. And I focus on working with children and adolescents, but also adults. So I just say geeks of all ages. And I specialize in sleep as well as working with veterans. And my favorite character, I would have to say, is Ahsoka Tano, which is a bit of a deep cut for those who are just watching the animated series, but we got to see a little bit in the latest few episodes on the Disney Plus platform, and we're going to be seeing her own show soon. But we'll hear more about her and the rest of our favorite characters, or most of them, in a little bit. For now, we're just going to focus on the dark side. So I'm going to open it up to the group. Let's go kind of down the line that we had already kind of created. And for those of us who are, fascinated with the dark side, obviously feel free to jump in. We'll have a little bit of a discussion on these characters, about the concept of the dark side, and then we'll switch over from there. But if Elizabeth, you want to get us started, or Ben can take it up as well.
So, I mean, there's a lot to say. I am flattered that I keep getting chosen to go first.
All right, fine. we'll cycle.
I mean, there is a lot to say. Let me collect some of my thoughts.
Perfectly fine. You know what? My whole idea was actually to kind of cycle down each person anyways. So Ben, why don't you get us started with the dark side that you know so very, very well?
So one kind of common trait that we see with the dark sides is their quest for power, their giving into their emotions. That's in the Sith code, is that passion gives you strength. It's supposed to be kind of dichotomous from the light side. For me, so with Palpatine, who I think Palpatine is very different than other dark side users. Most dark side users, they fall to the dark side because the light side wasn't helping them achieve their needs, wasn't helping them to get what they needed or what they felt that they needed. I know Nicole will talk about Anakin with that, so I'm going to let her do that. But Palpatine is different in that, granted, we don't see a lot of it in the canon, but in the Legends novels that do kind of talk about his origins, he's always been manipulative. He's always been controlling. He's always been very cold and apathetic towards others. I think if we had to talk about Palpatine in the real world, we would probably call him a psychopath or a sociopath, which are not clinical diagnostic terms, everybody. But he does kind of have a lot of those traits. He has a lack of empathy for other people. Everything is a tool or means for him to achieve his ends. And that is basically what they say about the dark side, is the path, to abilities that many consider unnatural. It is a way for him to achieve his power, for him to be in control of his world. One thing that I see with a lot of dark side users is they just want a sense of control in their life. Darth Tyrannus, who was Count Dooku, also he felt like he wasn't able to be the kind of person he wanted to be with the Jedi. He wasn't able to have control over his life, and so he fell to the dark side. So that is my 2 cents on Palpatine and the dark side.
if anyone has a specific thought, if you're feeling moved by the force to speak up, by all means, go ahead.
I'll follow up on that. Palpatine was actually who I wanted to talk about as well. And I think he's an interesting character in that, especially in the prequel trilogy, him being a Sith wasn't that big of a deal. He didn't need that. He didn't need being a Sith to become Grand Chancellor. He didn't need being a Sith to take over. I think that was a means. I think that was a way to have more power. But when it came down to it, he was just kind of a trashy dude. He was a bad dude. And being a Sith just gave him a little bit more. But he could have used the same political maneuvering, the same lying, the same psychopathic traits that Benjamin brought up to achieve the same end. So I really think that, especially early on, being a Sith wasn't as big of a story piece for Palpatine as just the fact that he was a bad dude.
I think it does speak to how there can be that quote unquote like bad dude in a lot of different communities. And the Jedi are not immune to that, right? So I do think there's that component. I also think that it's really important as we're talking about this, like what constitutes him as like a bad guy in a variety of ways. One of the things that I think is really important as we talk about him seeking power is also wanting proteges. Like he wants very much to corrupt others. And there's this grooming that's involved. And there's this behind the scenes manipulation, as well as, hey, I'm going to seduce you into wanting what it is that I want for you. And I'm going to essentially get you into not having as much autonomy, which I think is part of a big theme when we're talking about the empire. And when we talk about a variety of systemic issues, when we think about what's not a lovable component, right? In comparison to other Padawans who have Jedi masters and people who are helping guide them in ways that they do want, right? Versus, hey, this isn't exactly what I wanted. This didn't have to be the trajectory of my life. And I do think that is a huge component.
And this is why I love Anakin so much, because we have that quintessential bad guy here in Palpatine, right? But Anakin, he doesn't start off that way, and he doesn't even end that way. He has a tragic end, of course, but he is a great example of being able to show that there is still light within the dark. And his story really, again, it doesn't start off as bad. What puts him on the trajectory to the dark side is this intense fear of abandonment. He's afraid of losing his wife, and he has this horrible vision of her dying in childbirth, and all he wants to do is save her because, I mean, he's been abandoned by multiple people in his life. His mother ends up dying. Now, granted, I mean, she didn't abandon him, but she died. Qui-Gon, his original, who would be his Jedi master, dies as well. And so he goes to these extreme measures to try to save her. And it ends up consuming him, and he falls to the dark side as a result. But even up to that point, it was his anger that really kind of drove him to that point as well, feeling slighted by the Jedi Council for the fact that he wasn't a master. He was able to be on the council, but he was not a master. And that made him bitter, and it made him resentful. And these people that he idealized now sort of became demonized. And it just led to a lot of impulsive behavior, a lot of risky behaviors. And for Anakin, if we were to diagnose him as having a mental health disorder, he would be essentially a borderline personality disorder. He's very black and white. There's very little gray when it comes to him. And there's a quote in Revenge of the Sith that kind of illustrates this really perfectly when he's fighting Obi-Wan, and he says, if you're not with me, then you're my enemy. And that's sort of how borderline personality disorder plays out. You're either very, very good and you're idealized, or you're demonized. And in the end, obviously, we know, spoiler alert, he turns into Darth Vader, but he is redeemed in the end. He's saved by his son Luke. And it just shows that even though there is darkness in him, that doesn't mean that he's not redeemable.
Well, and he had that darkness cultivated that entire time as he's being groomed by Palpatine. I mean, he's got this old dude whispering in his ear from the age of 5 on and manipulating his path, getting him to deviate from all the teachings he's getting from the Jedi, telling him that the Jedi are bad, they don't have his best interest in mind. So, I mean, he was definitely pushed down that path. I think he could have turned out quite a bit differently if he didn't have that there.
Well,
Absolutely.
I wanted to add to that is one thing that made him very susceptible to Palpatine's grooming was that he had those losses. He had this such strong desire for connection and for people to be that like role model and that father figure. And nothing, not to be against Obi-Wan here, but Obi-Wan did not want to be his master. Obi-Wan took on that role out of a sense of obligation. And to have someone as a parent figure who is doing that, kind of not wholeheartedly, it can really kind of exacerbate a lot of those attachment issues that he had, which made him more susceptible to, wow, well, Obi-Wan doesn't really listen to me, but Palpatine, hears me, he validates me. And that's a very common kind of cycle of abuse with sex offenders specifically. And clearly that's, Palpatine didn't sexually abuse him, but he groomed him just like any other kind of abuser would. So
he was a predator.
Exactly.
He absolutely was a predator, just a different type.
And as it was the tradition of the Sith to essentially isolate, just to only be 2, there must only be 2, but each protege, each apprentice also tries to do the same to others. And not that this is constantly what one can expect to happen from those who have been abused, but the aspect of wielding emotions against one another can become destructive if we delve too deep into emotions. If we use too much of an emotional mind, then there is the risk of being completely at the whims and the mercy and the winds of fate or your own emotions. But here we also have the opposite. We have the Jedi Order. They're the Order of Light. So we were talking a bit about Obi-Wan. I wonder if anyone else has any thoughts about our handsome, dashing knight of the Jedi Order.
I'll jump in, talk about Obi-Wan. I think what makes him stand out from the Jedi Order is through his story. And I think the Kenobi series did a really good job of really fleshing out this character that lost everything, lost the hope in who he was. And I thought they did such a great job of orchestrating, of showing how can we have this crusade mentor who was a former council member and being one of the last of the Jedi, try to regain this self-confidence back into who he was and connecting back. And we had this young version of Leia that kind of sparks this light, which he doesn't even know is a part of the Skywalker family. So I think with him, I've always been such an admirer of him, especially in the 90s when I first saw it, that there was just something about Ben Kenobi. And then when you saw in the prequel series and the cartoon animation, you see somebody who's trying to do good, yet still trying to challenge the norm. Especially you see the influence by Qui-Gon and how that always ripple effects into Obi-Wan. And he does the best that he can. I think with Anakin, he did what he could do. This was a Padawan that was just dropped on his lap. And he unfortunately did the best he could. And you get to see that pull between Anakin and Obi-Wan. And I think Revenge of the Sith, Dr. Nicole, you were talking about watching it today. I think about, right before their duel, there's Obi-Wan still trying to reach his friend, still trying to reach his, almost like a younger brother. And then just having to just focus onto the Force and be like, if I need to take you, I need to do what I need to do for the greater good, which is why I think Obi-Wan did get the high ground and played into really the true essence of the Force and just trusting it.
I think with Obi-Wan in the beginning, from the prequel, as we see him throughout the prequel series and even the animated series, he actually struggled a lot with what seemed to me like imposter syndrome. He wanted to be this good version of a Jedi, but he also recognized a lot of the flaws through the Jedi system and the flaws of the universe, of the world around him, and he really struggled to find his place within that system. Because, well, that was all he knew. Like, the Jedi were raised in the system, but he really struggled to kind of, I see that things aren't working, but this is what I'm taught. So how do I find this way to be who I think I need to be to help Anakin? He recognized that, yes, I didn't go into this willingly, but here I am, and I want to be the best master that I can be to help this boy who's really struggling. He recognized that Anakin was struggling, but he just didn't know how to really connect until it was too late.
Similarly, we see almost an echo, stories are like poetry, they rhyme. That's a very bad impersonation of Lucas, but basically Luke, Luke, I wonder if that's kind of an insert character there, goes through a similar challenge. He also, seeks, he has this war thrown into his lap that he needs to do his best to try to solve it. We all have these struggles that we're all trying to solve. We're all the heroes of our own journey. And Luke, for all of his best efforts to try to help his friends, to forego his education, listen up, kids, remember, stay in school, because then you get to learn how to wield the Force your way. And even later on, even after he's victorious, his struggles don't end because, spoiler alert, when Luke tries to revive the Jedi Order, the Jedi kind of community, whether it's nepotism, getting his nephew in there, whether it's the expectations, whether it's disregarding the budding mental health issues of Kylo Ren, and this, tele-grooming that Kylo is getting from Snoke, question mark? I don't want to spoil the last movie if someone hasn't seen it. But even the best laid plans of Jedi and Sith often go awry. So does anyone else have any thoughts about Luke and or Leia?
For Luke, I like Luke a lot because I feel like he embodies the gray Jedi code, right? So we have our light side, our Jedi code, we have our dark side, Sith code, but Luke kind of functions in the gray. The Jedi code is all about logic and rationality, no attachment, no emotion, just using that logic and rationality to push us forward. Whereas the dark side or the Sith code, it's all about emotion. It's anger, whatever we can do to pursue our goals. Whereas within the gray Jedi code, we're using both. And to put it in psychological terms, as we know, that's logical mind for the Jedi code. Of course, I'm jumping ahead, my bad. For the Sith code, that would be emotion mind. So Luke, I feel, operates in what we call the wise mind. So we do see him using that logic and rationality, but we do see, when he, leaves to go save his friends, that he's operating on that emotion mind as well. So I feel like him and Ahsoka Tano are great examples of the gray Jedi, and I'll stop talking about this because apparently we're jumping ahead a little bit.
But when it comes down to it, Luke ends up making a lot of the same mistakes that the Jedi made earlier on. And ultimately, the Jedi Academy that he's starting has the same fate. And Luke, just like his mentors, Obi-Wan and Yoda, goes to be a hermit someplace, gives up on it, realizes he can't do what he needed to do, and steps away. So gray, light, it was the same outcome. And maybe that was Luke going back to more the traditional mindsets, maybe not following that new idea of being more of a gray or neutral Jedi, and falling back into the same rut that befell everybody else. I don't know.
So I wanted to say something about the light and dark side. So one of the things to think about is how these characters deal with their trauma or their victimization. So the dark side. There, it's the old kind of adage that hurt people hurt. So they got hurt and now they're going to hurt other people. But when we look at the Jedis, or the kind of good side, light side, these hurt people help. And so when we talk about this in terms of, because I teach about victims, we can look at these characters and say, well, Leia was a victim. Here's all the ways, right? Or Anakin was a victim, and here's all the ways. And it's interesting to see the coping and how people deal with it. And I think with Anakin, he tried for a while to be, you know, having like post-traumatic growth and live this new life, even after horrible things happened. But, you know, he kind of broke. Whereas we see Leia, even till the very end, she was still trying to help, even though she had been hurt so much.
I want to say, with regards to that kind of hurt people helping versus hurting, I really kind of see that also because, well, in the codes, the Sith code, it's all about, okay, if you're in pain, basically you use that to break your chains and to get revenge. That's the kind of the mindset of the Sith is, you know, do unto others what they do to you, but do it tenfold, basically. Whereas the Jedi are like, okay, yes, this happened to you, but how do we stop it from happening to other people? But the issue with the Jedi there is that they don't really take their own experiences into account. They're like, okay, yes, I can take this because I'm the Jedi and I'm supposed to take it, you know, so as long as the, you know, citizens don't take it. But what happens a lot, and we do see it kind of in the animated series a bit with quite a few other Jedi that are introduced, that they go through traumas and the way of the Jedi doesn't work for them to heal through their own issues. They do give into their emotions because, well, they are all sentient beings and they have emotions, and to say, well, yes, this happened to me, but I have to not be upset about it, doesn't work clearly. And I think what Leia shows really well in her experiences, she had so much shit go on to her and around her. And one argument could be, yeah, and then she just kept pushing forward and was, you know, she didn't have time to deal with her own problems because she was taking care of a bunch of men who weren't dealing with their problems. But also she did take the time for herself when she needed it to like grieve, to express herself. But she knew where that balance was. She's like, okay, this is what I'm feeling, and I'm going to use that to guide my actions to help other people so they don't understand, because I can empathize with their suffering. Instead of holding on to her pain, she used it to empathize with others. And I think that's what makes Leia so much better than Luke.
Yeah, I think that she was able to be a fully complete, emotionally competent human being. And I think that the Jedi are largely hamstrung by their own code, their lack of attachment. I mean, that's something that's very human that they are supposed to give up. And going back to this idea of Anakin being kind of borderline, how does that work when you're told give up, you know, eschew all of your attachments, but that is what you crave, and that is the trauma that you keep experiencing is what happens to the people you are attached to.
So I think that this goes to some of the things that we've brought up a few times, and I think sometimes with the way that it can be phrased is that, oh, the dark side is it's the bad side, right? And it's the angry side, and anger is bad. Oh, trauma, it's the trauma side, and trauma is bad. And that's not necessarily the case. And a lot of times things should make us angry. Like if we're looking around at our political climate right now and we're not getting angry about some things, there's probably something to be said about that. Anger exists a lot of times when we see that things are not fair, that things are not just. And in many times we can utilize that anger in a great way. And a lot of times we can utilize these experiences of trauma and look at post-traumatic growth, not just, oh, how does trauma damage us? And I think Dr. Clevenger can talk more if she would like to about post-traumatic growth. I believe she said that she wanted to earlier when we were talking about what we wanted to talk about today.
You're very kind. I did want to talk about it because working with victims, you know, it can be very hard because we see them as just a victim, and we see their trauma, or sometimes people will associate them with what happened to them. But with post-traumatic growth, this horrible thing happened to you, but you were able to sort of get through it, and there could be something positive that came out on the other side. Maybe you want to live your life a different way. Maybe you want to go to school. Maybe you want to help other people. And for me, one of the things that I've seen is individuals who have been victimized in these awful ways, at the end of kind of going through, sometimes it's therapy, sometimes it's group or treatment, they then go on to help other people because they kind of made it through this. And it's always so impressive to me because I think I would just crumble. I don't know that I could be that courageous and have that growth in myself to be able to say, okay, this horrible thing happened, but what are you going to do with it now? Which is what a lot of people do. And I think with Star Wars, like I said, I mean, I love Leia. I know I said I love Jabba the Hutt, but I love Leia too. Leia had so much of her own stuff, but yet she is taking care of the men, as Benjamin said. She's kind of taking care of everybody, but she was still able to go on. And I think that when we think about post-traumatic growth, it's going on, but then you're also doing something positive after the fact. And it can be that you had some trauma and maybe you went to the, I hate to say bad side too, dark side, but you were able to deal with it and move on in something positive. And one of the things too, I think Isaac, you said it, I can't remember who said, everybody's the hero in their own story. If we saw some of these stories from a different viewpoint, I'm not so sure that some of these people would be seen as heroes, because of, once again, thinking about the viewpoint. Jabba was a hero. I'll say that. I say that all the time. Han owed him money and he did not pay up.
Java brought order to a lawless wasteland.
Dude. See, it's about perspective, but post-traumatic growth can happen in the short term. It can happen in the long term. But I think these characters, they illustrate it so beautifully.
Leia was also a survivor. And I think that sometimes when you survive something that's big and bad and traumatic that a lot of people don't make it through, one of the ways that you justify your survival, one of the ways you tell yourself, it's okay that I made it through, is by helping others. It's by helping others make it through. And we see Leia lose billions of other folks from Alderaan. I don't know the exact death toll, but a lot of people, spoiler alerts. And in a way, her surviving that and her doing some good is a way to say, yeah, maybe I wasn't there, maybe I couldn't stop it, but I'm going to help a lot of other people. And I think that's important too.
And so how we help others as well of ourselves, Nicole was able to foresee the next topic. So the middle ground between the dark and the light, between the emotion mind and the wise mind, sorry, the logic mind is the wise mind, which we feel is very well illustrated as the gray Jedi. So Nicole, why don't you pick up where you left off?
Yeah, so what I was saying about that is, you know, we talk about that a lot in therapy, the idea of the logical mind, which is, again, that rationality and logic, that's what drives us. And when you look at the Jedi code, that's exactly what it is, right? We're supposed to forego attachment, we're supposed to forego emotion, and we're just supposed to rely on logic and rationality and the Force, like that there is only the Force. Whereas when we look at the Sith code, it, you know, would represent what we call emotion mind, which is, again, anger and all those other emotions, which, again, I believe, as Dr. Han had said, was, you know, anger is perceived as bad, but is it truly bad? I mean, in Star Wars, it's illustrated that way. However, anger does have a purpose. It has a function. It tells us what we need, and it helps us sometimes achieve goals. The Sith don't necessarily do it in the most healthy way, but it can be a useful emotion. But I love the gray Jedi because, again, it's both light and dark. You know, there is no light without dark. There is no peace without chaos. You know, we have to rely on both logic and emotion in order to propel us forward and to operate in what we call the wise mind, to help make our decisions, to help guide us. It's not just, you know, logic. It's not just emotion. It's both.
I think it also speaks to a higher level of moral development too. If we want to go back to like Psych 101, dichotomous thinking is not that high on the scale. We expect people to progress past that. We expect people to be able to take different points of view, not always just choose one or the other. And I think that's one of the things that's problematic about the Jedi is they really are taught from the ground up. This is the perspective you take. You don't look at the other side. You can't look at the other side. The other side is always wrong. And I think that's problematic.
And again, back to my earlier presentation about Anakin, where I said when he looks at Obi-Wan and he says, if you're not with me, then you're my enemy. Again, it's that very black and white type of thinking. And, you know, Obi-Wan says, you know, that famous line afterwards, only a Sith deals in absolutes. The bottom line is they both deal in absolutes. It's either, you know, you're either a Jedi or you're a Sith. That's it. And you either have no attachment and no emotion, or you operate only on emotion.
So for the sake of time, we noticed that we've been focusing a lot on the Force wielders, but whether it's all Sith or all Jedi, no, there's a place in between. There's also everybody else. So I want to kind of switch over to moving forward, as this mindful approach can be very helpful. And this is the way to Mandalorians. What can we say about the Mandalorians?
So one thing I like about the Mandalorians and the way that they showed the Mandalorian culture is it's not a uniform culture. It's not a monolithic culture. It's actually got, you know, quite a lot of diversity in it, because you got the Mandalorians that lived on Mandalore, that they can take off their helmets, they can walk around in normal clothes and everything. They still follow the creed to their own ways, versus the Children of the Watch, who are like very strict orthodox approach to like, no, you know, this is a very literal, you know, taking of the creed. And then you got someone like Din Djarin, who was not born a Mandalorian. He became a Mandalorian by being a foundling. And the idea that, you know, people can be adopted into it, can grow in this culture and find their own path of following the creed and following the way, I think is really important, because culture and religion are something are two things that are very big in a lot of people's lives. And one thing that some people really struggle with is, like, if you were raised in a specific culture and that's all you know, then when you're exposed to something different, it can be very difficult for you. Conversely, though, you can have people that like have not been raised with any religion, but yet they choose, you know what, I like what this religion is teaching, I'm going to devote my life to it, I'm going to convert. And so I think that the Mandalorians, as shown in the show, really kind of exemplify, like, you have all these different options to still follow the way. Like, they're all saying this is the way, but yet they're all following the way a little bit differently. And so, but none of them are really wrong. There's no wrong. There's the way, and there's a way you do the way, I think.
Yeah, the
there's,
Mandalorians, I think, present a good post-traumatic growth. What we see through their culture and through how they include members that are very diverse. The inclusion that they have, exclusion that they have, that goes on to their culture is very fascinating. With Dr. Nicole displaying with you know, Grogu and stuff. It's almost like they're very open arms, even though that we see through the show, without giving spoilers, that there's a clash between these subtypes within Mandalorians. The way I've always kind of seen, I used it in a group 2 weeks ago as almost like a mantra of radical acceptance, of that they can come from two different components. But this is the way, is this thing of like, I don't have to approve your stance and how you see our culture. We're just going to be adjointed because we share this just fellowship, this overall approach of this resiliency of that we're a people that continues to push forward, and despite the empire, despite the Clone Wars, we still survive. And that's always, I think, an interesting theme that we see within our culture is despite all of these tragedies, they still grow and they still evolve into a better versions of themselves.
And it is that ability to connect on that shared experience that seems to unite the tribes. I'm not going to go into too much spoils. We had our season finale just recently, so at least you all can rest easy on that. But the aspect of community, of inclusion, and of family is a really important one, because anyone can be these Mandalorian. It is not just by birth. It is not just by creed. It is however you do the Mando thing that you do, as you do your way. That is the way. And in addition, there's the concept of the family unit. Who becomes the Mandalorian? Once as a foundling, you were found family. You were adopted into the Mandalorian community. And part of being a family doesn't necessarily always have to be by blood. It could be by shared experience. It can be by shared values. It can just be about shared enjoyment of each other's life events. You know, a first trip out, a first force push, and then even the value of, well, healthy sleep. But there is still this difficulty, a trauma of the culture, the intergenerational trauma of their losses, their deaths at the hands of the Empire, and even the rivalries between the factions. How, at least in the Rebels series, the only threat to the Mandalorians are other Mandalorians. The only ones who defeat them are themselves. So how do we overcome our intergenerational trauma? How do we overcome our hatred of each other?
Mm-hmm. I think I love that you brought up Rebels, because I was going to say, if people want more on-screen depictions of Grey Jedi, if they want more on-screen background of the Mandalorians and the dark saber, and right, like Rebels, definitely.
Well, one thing I want to, sorry.
Go for it.
Okay, so in the Legends novels that are not canon and have never been seen on screen, the Mandalorians were never a people with a homeworld. It was always a culture that people created for themselves that they would kind of join in. So it was a little different than what we see in Rebels and in the Mandalorian, where there are like pure blood, I guess you would call them. I'm thinking still in Harry Potter terms, because there was the people that were born on Mandalore. They're Mandalorian by blood, and then there's the Mandalorians by choice. Whereas in Legends, they were all Mandalorians by choice. They followed the creed because that, was their way of, fitting in with the universe and, doing the deeds that they felt were important to do. And they formed a whole, society of no one being by blood. There were multiple species that were represented in the Mandalorians and they all wore the helmets in different ways. But I thought that was really good that they still showed it in this new series, that with the foundlings, that like, yeah, you don't have to be by blood to still be part of this culture. You can still be brought up into it. You can still join it on your own. I thought that was a really cool way that they did it.
And being a culture that's kind of in diaspora and has been for quite some time, that's one way that they can keep adding. They keep bringing people into their ranks and showing them the way. And in a large way, that helps them stay alive. It helps the Mandalorian culture continue to exist and grow.
Mm-hmm.
Similarly, how, in Legends, we have the various types, all are welcome for the most part into, under the banner of the Mythosaur. That's that funky creature that you see associated with the Mandalorians, for those few who aren't as caught up. But this is a way of overcoming any of these types of us versus them mentality. Granted, yes, there's the Empire versus the Mandalorians, and maybe even other sects of Mandalorians we must fight against because they don't wear their helmets right. Or this is something that in the series, in The Mandalorian, we see this ism that we can overcome. We can find a way for everyone to join the way. So I wanted to also point out that there's a various few foundlings there that if you notice from those earlier episodes, their helmets are also different. There is gaps in the back of their helmets. They're open, they're wide. They're not the same. And discussions online show that to some degree, these are because some of the actors, the young actors themselves were on the autism spectrum. And so whether this is to just accommodate the actors, but it also reveals that why wouldn't the Mandalorians in accepting in new members accommodate their specific needs? So though there is diversity, that doesn't necessarily make them deficient, and they can still be part of the community. So we have a lot of different species, a lot of different groups in all of Star Wars, a lot of different characters, and even Jabba the Hutt is welcome. So how do we all engage in, accept in, and work with diversity?
I specifically chose these characters to be on this slide because they all talk in a different way. They all speak and communicate in different ways. Even Grogu, who is non-speaking, is using a device to speak, spoiler. But I thought that was a really great thing, because I also think earlier when I didn't name a character to speak about specifically, because there is a character that I think got a lot of flack for being annoying, for people not liking the way that he spoke, not liking his voice, when we have a whole plethora of characters that speak very differently, and we give them a bit more grace. And I do think that was also one of the components of something to discuss when we're thinking about Star Wars, which is the characters that might not be favorites, and why, and what's up with that.
I'm reminded a bit of a famous, I don't know, famous, but there was a soldier from World War II, or someone who was sabotaging the Nazis, and they themselves were gay, and made sure that at their unfortunate demise, that their last words were recorded, that let it be known that homosexuals are not cowards, that they can do great things, that they can help, they can be of part of the team. And even here, we have various characters that not everybody can connect with just by feeling like Jar Jar Binks and sounding like Jar Jar Binks, and yet he was able to help save a lot of the galaxy, or at least postpone a lot of the damage that Palpatine was trying to make happen. So there definitely is space for all of us in this vast opera in the stars.
I want to say really quickly, when I first saw Phantom Menace, I actually identified a lot with Jar Jar, because he was annoying and he was kind of ditzy, and he was like, he couldn't pay attention, and he tried so hard to help, but he made things worse. Because I was like that growing up. I was hyperactive. I wanted so badly to fit in and to help out and to belong, but I would make things worse and everything. And to see someone like that, he can still do good, even by accident. He still saved the day. I thought that was really great to see for me, because I see him as someone that you don't have to be the calm, cool, collected warrior to be a savior. Or to do good. So that's why I like him.
One of the things that was really interesting for me about Jar Jar was, so I'm 41, right? And so growing up, I watched the originals, and then I was a teenager when the other ones came out. So I didn't love Jar Jar. Most of my friends didn't love him. Everybody said he ruined the movies, right? But then I went to Star Wars Celebration in 2019, and the people who were kids, when it came out, they loved him. It was this outpouring of love for Jar Jar And me and the middle-aged, Star Wars fans are like, wait, you like Jar Jar? And they were like, we love him. It was their Ewoks or, whatever.
Exactly.
And so it's interesting to see how different fans perceive these different characters.
I'm glad you brought up Ewoks because that's exactly what I was thinking. I loved Ewoks when I was a kid, and then older folks that I knew were like, they're annoying, I hate them, they shouldn't be in Star Wars.
But they're so
Generational
awesome.
differences.
They're so awesome, and that segues into what I wanted to say really quickly about Yoda, because like when we first meet Yoda and he sees Luke and Luke's like, you're a Jedi master, and he's like, judge me by my size, do you? Like, he's so small, you wouldn't expect him to be this really powerful Jedi in comparison to somebody like Chewbacca, who's this big furry walking carpet, but he can rip your arms off with no problem. And it's really kind of cool to see, just this tiny little dude with this much power. And Jar Jar, a lot of my autistic clients identify with Jar Jar because of that social awkwardness that he presents with as well. I just had a client today who said, when I mentioned that I was doing this, he's like, oh, please talk about Jar Jar. He goes, because I thought that it was a great depiction of like neurodiversity.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that that's a huge piece, especially coming from the therapeutic standpoint, coming from the assessment standpoint. We see a lot of people who have been bullied. We see a lot of people who have been called a lot of different names: rude, deficient, clumsy, right? Lazy, all these different, pieces, and not often really considered for their strengths, and not really considering that when it comes to people and achieving certain goals or achieving certain things, what's going on with offering them the supports that they're needing for that? Because if we think about it, most people can accomplish most goals when certain conditions are met. And if we acknowledge that, yes, certain people in our society have their conditions met more readily. And when we understand some of these pieces, instead of looking at it from that medical model standpoint of, hey, this person is defective, but hey, this person doesn't necessarily have the environment that is as supportive for them. That's a totally different piece. And I think it's also probably important that we maybe describe what neurodivergent means and neurodiversity. Sometimes we use these big words. And, we are talking to an audience of people, but if we consider neuro relating to the brain and diversity meaning differences, and to acknowledge that there are normal and natural differences that are going to occur in nature, and that these are not necessarily meant to be diseases that need to be cured, but more along the lines, again, of, hey, this is normal variance. And if we look at people and characters and we say, hey, not just, oh, everything is bad, but if we're looking at, hey, what are their strengths? And to also acknowledge that, yeah, there are going to be a lot of people and a lot of people who are going to relate to these characters. And right, if we're thinking about what's going on that this person is annoying us, and to kind of dig a little deeper within ourselves as to, well, what's going on that I'm so annoyed right now? And what is that annoyance about? And really exploring that piece can also help us with certain things that are happening with, unfortunately, when we look at the Star Wars fandom, there is a lot of bullying that happens. And there are some unfortunate components related to this. And so when we want to address it and we want to say, yes, if we are these huge fans, what is Star Wars actually teaching us? And how do we use that? Right? Or maybe not teaching us, but maybe it's at least bringing it to a more palatable way to make this a discussion. And I think that's one of the very beautiful things about Star Wars and about this panel and our discussion today. And yes, all of it.
It takes a universe, it takes a galaxy, and it doesn't have to be far, far away. It can be here. We can make this alliance of ours not necessarily have to be a rebellion, or maybe think of it as such, that we have to fight against the old guard that assumed that there is just a black or white. There is just a Vader and his stormtroopers who are all uniform in their uniforms. And yet there is a wide spectrum of a variety of ways that sentient life can present, that people can work together, can support each other. So I notice we are getting short and close to the end of time for this session, not of all time, I hope. But I wanted to open up at least for any questions that the audience may have. And if not, then we'll say a little goodbyes on our end. If there's a microphone that can be passed to any audience members with questions, they can raise their hands, they can come on up. In the meanwhile, why don't our speakers let us know where you can find us as any questions are brewing. Let's go in reverse. So, Colt, where can we find you?
At my house, but if I'm not here, you can find me on Twitter, where I might post once in a blue moon at Dr. Blunt 4. At Dr. Blunt 1, 2, and 3 were taken already.
And 422, I bet.
I'm sure.
And Nicole, where can audiences hear more of your amazing thoughts?
You can find me on Instagram at levelup_therapist or on Twitter at levelup_therapy or online at my website, nextleveluptherapy.com.
I'm sensing a theme here. What about you, Brent?
I can be reached through Twitter and IG through the Geek Therapist.
Perfect place. And Shelly, where can those interested hear more from you?
At Dr. Clevenger on Twitter.
Simple, easy. Ben, we'll need to unmute.
You can find me through, I have a podcast called Mental Health Quest, the Therapist Office and Beyond, where we talk about what is mental health, what does it look like, how to find it, and so much more. So you can listen to that wherever podcasts are found, and you can find us on Facebook and Twitter at MHQ Podcast.
And Dr. Han?
Thanks. I don't really use that much social media currently, but I do have a link tree, Dr. Elizabeth Smith, PsyD, PSYD. And so there are a few different links with different nonprofits that I work with and different organizations, including MiraCare Neurobehavioral Health. Mm-hmm.
And as for myself, for those in California who are seeking psychotherapy services, you can find me at allmindhealth.com. There's a link up in the moon over here for those who wish to follow, or you can find me on all the socials at allmindhealth. So I think one of them has a 1 at the end, All Mind Health 1. If you can't find
Twitter,
me at 1,
I think the Twitter is the All Mind Health 1.
There we go. So if there's no questions from the audience, curiosities, nonetheless, thank you very much, everybody, for joining, and may the 4th be with you. Bye, everybody.
Thank you everyone for coming. Thank you so much to our panelists for your time. I know it's like the end of the workday, so just thank you for your time. I hope you folks did a great one. Remember, if you to check in if you haven't done so already, and we also have raffle tickets as well. So if you haven't done that yet, the raffle consists of, sorry, folks can't participate, but it's a Nintendo Switch, AirPods, and a headset.
What?
I want to participate.
Lynn, I want some.
That's it. Straight dark side.
Yeah.
This is my villain origin story right here.
The Geek Week UCLA raffle. That's the point. So thank you, folks. Head over to Carnesville Palisades, where we're having Star Wars trivia. That's run by Jason Clark, one of our students on the advisory board. And then also head to BCAF because we have some Star Wars themed treats. We have Star Wars cookies and blue milk. Yeah. So thank you, folks, for coming.
I don't want to know how you serve the blue milk.
Yeah, we'll try and mail that to you folks. I'm gonna stop the recording.
Right.